Well, hello, everybody. This is Erin King coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, your Northeast Florida real estate professional. And as promised, we've got our next Real Estate Weekly Deep Dive. And folks, we've got a lot of content to cover today. There's a lot for us to talk about. There's been a lot going on. If you've been paying attention to the markets, the stock market's up and down, inflation is up, productivity is down. There's just all kinds of things going on, and everybody's going, oh, the real estate bubble, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Because I think as we get into the end of the year and the holidays and the next 60 days going into next year, I really think that you're going to hear a little bit more about this. People that want to sell their home, like the nice lady I talked to today for over an hour and a half because she's terrified to put her house on the market because she doesn't have anywhere to go. Okay, that is our job, is to help you think through those types of things. And we actually came up with some really good ideas to get her moving forward. But as a consumer, you need to be armed with this knowledge, because this person that I talked to earlier today, she had been given some of the worst advice I have heard in a long time. And I ran it through some of my other real estate professionals, and they were all that. Everybody was like, I cannot believe people are actually telling people to do this stuff. So I don't want to get into the details. We're certainly not here to finger point. We're here to learn. So we're going to deep dive today into the 5 reasons that an industry might crash. So that will give you the framework to push back on some of this other information that's being put out there about people saying things are going to crash. So away we go. First of all, an item becomes obsolete, or a service becomes obsolete. 2, demand for an item or service drops dramatically. 3, demand for an item or service is artificially generated. I got to move my mug, my beautiful face out of the road here. Number 4, the supply of the item or service increases dramatically. Certainly we haven't seen any of that going on in real estate this year. 5, demand for the item or service is impacted by outside of market dynamics. And that's going to be an interesting one that we're going to talk a little bit about more as we get into this week's deep dive. So let's talk about this first one here. An item or service becomes obsolete. Well, let's talk about Blockbuster and Netflix. It's a classic example. Netflix had an opportunity, or Netflix gave Blockbuster an opportunity to purchase them. And Blockbuster, in all their wisdom, sat back and they said, no. We are going to ride this VHS tape thing all the way to the, yes, you filled it in correctly, all the way to the ground. So we know how that worked out for Blockbuster, okay? So let's apply that to housing. Is housing becoming more or less obsolete? Well, the 2021 State of the American Homeowner from Unison says that 64% of homeowners surveyed said that the pandemic made them feel better and made them feel that their home was more important than ever. That's a big number, folks. That's a big number. Okay, 83% of homeowners said they felt that their home kept them safe during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 91% of homeowners say they feel secure or stable or successful owning a home. And why is this important right now? And it's important for this reason. Back in 2010, there certainly was a trend in this country where many people said, I don't know if owning a home is really the American dream anymore. Homes have lost a lot of value. Maybe renting is a better option. Maybe I can protect my investment a little bit better. And that was the challenge. Well, let's look at today. We can confidently say, coming out of the pandemic, home has become much more important across the country. Is home becoming less obsolete today? No way. It is exactly the opposite. And we look out there and we say, okay, would this cause an industry to crash when it's becoming more and more important to people? No. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the only reason. But let's say, if you're talking to someone about this question, do you believe homes are becoming more important through the pandemic or less important? And we can clearly see from the data that people think that homes are more important today. It's the opposite argument of obsolescence. And the answer is easy to that too. You have other things. Low interest rates. Certainly those wanted to get in the housing rush. We've talked extensively about that in My Fear. If you're educated and you're well prepared to have that conversation, that's an important perspective to bring into the conversation about a crash. There's no obsolescence here. Number 2, demand for an item or service drops dramatically. Now let's think restaurants in the summer of 2020. To all my restaurant friends out there, I got you back. Okay, we're back in. We've been back in for a long time. But if your business is based upon people gathering and eating, and then all of a sudden you can't do that, you're in trouble. And we remember what happened to a lot of our restaurant friends in March, April, and May of last year when they just, they were just fighting to stay alive, because you can't serve food to people if you can't serve food to people. Okay, and that's how they make money. So that certainly puts restaurants in a tough position, and some made it and some didn't. And this can lead to an entire industry crash when you have something like that happen. Now let's talk about where we are right now. There's a lot of talk in real estate about real estate slowing down. And we've covered that weeks and weeks now. And we can go back to a slide here that we've covered before. And this is the showing times showing index over the last 5 Septembers. And you can see September over September for the last several years, for the last 5 years, that we are still way up in 2021 versus our most normal year, which was 2019. Yes, we are factually down from last year. But remember, we tried to cram in an incredible amount of business in the last half of 2020, and everybody was moving through the Great Migration. So yes, that is not sustainable. But you can see here from the graph that we are still doing very, very well. So let's talk a little bit about what Mr. Bill McBride has to say about all this. Well, sales, according to NSA in September, were 548,000. And it was 2.7% below September of last year, which is 563,000 excluding last September, which is definitely distorted by delayed selling season in 2020. So sales non-seasonally adjusted were the strongest since 2005. That's huge. Yeah, year over year, so September of last year, but remember, we crammed all that business again into the last half of the year because of the pandemic. And all the reasons we know, but no doubt we're in a very good market right now. And there are signs of it starting to decelerate, but that is okay. We have to get the full context in. We are still very, very, very busy. The other component to this demand or service dropping dramatically is the other question is, do you think real estate is going to last? Is this market going to last? Definitely a question that has come up as I contact people and as we get into the end of the year here over the next 60 days. So let's look back, and I remind you of this during our last deep dive. We sold 6.5 million homes in 2020, and we're going to surpass that this year. Whoop, I went too far. A very, very good real estate market. And there's nothing saying that markets are going to slow down now, or we think the robustness of this market is going to continue. But I think that's where forecasters are saying that it's going to slow down, but it's certainly not sustainable. I'm not saying that. But there's not a dramatic decrease or anything like that forecasted in the next year. It's going to be a very important question as we get through the rest of the year, what's going to happen. And again, I keep saying, instead of doing this all the time, the real estate market's starting to do this. We are not here. We're not even here. We're still up here. Number 3, demand for items or services was artificially generated. So this is a really interesting one, folks, because I keep hearing different channels in the space talk about the crash of 2008. And folks, talking about the crash of 2008 and comparing it to what's going on now is like saying all airplanes crash for the exact same reason. All airplane investigators use what's called the Swiss cheese model. Slices of Swiss cheese, holes in different places. Aircraft crash because of a set of events set in motion that all cause everything to happen. The state of events that are causing the market to do what it's doing right now are nothing like what they were that caused the 2008. So if you're listening to these folks that are saying 2008 again, 2008 again, I understand that it may feel a certain way. But just because it feels a certain way doesn't mean that that's actually what's going on. And if you ask any pilot who's ever flown an airplane before, they will tell you that that's true. Because if you have the power pulled on to the full and you're trying to fly through clouds and you're going down, your brain actually tells you that you feel like you're going up. So the mind can play tricks on us sometimes. So let's talk about the facts. So in 2006, 2006, 7, and 8, And we've talked about this extensively, that this is not 2008 again. We can confidently say, looking in the rearview mirror, the demand for homes was artificially inflated coming into the crash. Why? Because many who got home loans that they couldn't have gotten otherwise. I mean, it's an ongoing joke in our inventory. If you could fog a mirror in 2005 and you had enough courage to say the right things to a loan officer, you could buy as many houses as you wanted to, regardless of if you could afford them or not. You could throw furniture into the deal too and finance your furniture for 30 years, because that's smart. You had all these different loans in the market too. You had no income verification, and there were just all these different programs that you could get into. And that's not where we are today. So let's look at our industry over time. And this is a report from the Urban Institute. Lending standards have been getting tighter. They have not been getting weaker. They have been getting tighter. And this goes all the way back to 1999, and it looks at product risk and borrower risk. And you can see the red and the orange intersecting sometime very close to 2015. And so a healthy lending standard, or a reasonable lending standard, you can see in the middle, it's going to have a little bit of product risk and a little bit of borrower risk. So think of this product risk as the type of loans in the market, and the borrower risk is, will they be able to qualify for the thing that they want to have based on their credit and asset profiles? And what we know since the housing crisis is product risk has been virtually eliminated in the mortgage market, and borrower risk has been seriously pulled back. If anything, as I've said before, I think the conversion will need to be to get more folks into homes, and we need to loosen credit for that going forward. Oh, and by the way, in the last year, this has gone down. There are some products that had left the market. You remember last year, jumbo loans, for example. And jumbo loans, for those of you that may not know what that lingo is, that's for buying really expensive homes over $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. Okay, I probably should make a video about that sometime too. Or maybe I'll have one of my mortgage people do it. But anyways, they had sidelined mortgage jumbo loans for a while, and investors everybody was terrified about forbearance, and they were worried about how the pandemic was going to affect everything. But folks, the lending standards have gotten a little bit tighter over the last year, so we can definitely say we're not where we were back in 2007, where demand was artificially inflated by giving people homes that they not only didn't qualify for, but they could never pay for. If we also want to take it a step further, let's go back to the NAR's credit availability index. Thank you. The way you read the credit availability index is the higher the reading, the easier it is to get a loan. And the lower the reading, the more difficult it is to get a loan. And this goes all the way back to 2004, so pre-crash. And you can see it was super, super easy to get a loan in 2000, where it crested out in 2006, where the measurement is just almost 869. So again, super easy. And we dropped off that pendulum swing and got back to where we are about right now, and we're at 125.6. So the underwriting standards are arguably stricter now than they have been in modern times. Where's the crash? Again, where's the crash? So confidently we can say we're not in an environment that back to when people are buying homes that they couldn't afford. And we've talked extensively about equity in homes coming out of the last 10 years. The shining star of the pandemic is how people treated the equity in their homes differently because of the bad experiences people had previously. So we can look at all this and say confidently, I don't see a crash. Next, supply of an item or service increases dramatically. Well, I think without getting into too much detail, but we're going to go into this a little bit more here. We haven't seen any severe increases in not much of anything in supply. So think the housing crash 15 years ago. What year would cause that? We saw all these builders building supply in dramatic increases, and we have a drop in the value, then almost 20% loss in home values during the housing crisis, because they were just frankly overbuilt. Well, where do we stand today? As you can see from the graphic here, we don't have enough market. So a buyer's market, you have greater than 7 months of inventory, which you can clearly see 2008 and 2010. It was a buyer's menu. You could hold a seller over the coals for about all you wanted, and they'd usually work with you. And then the last few years here, you can see it's just very steadily dwindled back into a very strong seller's market. Well, we've got historically low inventories, and things are finally starting to recover. So is this where we want to be? Not necessarily, but is this a crash? Not really. You got to get perspective on this. In January of 2020, in our MLS in Northeast Florida, there were roughly 9,000 to 10,000 units of inventory. So 9,000 to 10,000 doorknobs available for sale in our inventory on a daily basis. And those homes were selling in about 130 days. You fast forward to January of 21 this year. The 3rd January of 21 this year, there were 932 total doorknobs in our entire MLS available for sale. That is a dramatic decrease in inventory. But fast forward to Monday, and we're at about 3,300 doorknobs available for sale, and those are still skipping along and right around 30 days. It's a very strong market, folks. It is slowing down a little bit, but when I say decelerate, I mean decelerate a little bit. I don't mean crash into a tree like we've talked about before. So let's see here. Let's talk a little bit about but what about all the foreclosures? What about all the foreclosures? What about all the foreclosures? Well, let's talk a little bit more about that and get some perspective. So let me break this down for you. In 5 years of 2017, 2018, 2019, 20, and the first half of 2021, as we look at these numbers, normal years, we typically have about 290,000 foreclosures a year in this country until the moratorium of 2020, where the number dropped to 129,000. Okay? In the first half of 2021, we've only seen 19,560 foreclosures. That's dramatic. Where's the crash? We're coming out of we're coming out of this pretty handily. As a matter of fact, the first 433,000 foreclosures that we're going to potentially have would just make up for the last couple of years we actually haven't gotten that inventory on the market. Now, we don't wish this upon anybody. A foreclosure is a horrible crisis for somebody to go through. We don't want anybody to go through that. And if you're considering going through a foreclosure, you really need to talk to a skilled realtor before you do that, and a skilled mortgage loan officer. There's a lot of different options that they can do for you right now. There's a lot of different avenues. You probably don't have to lose your house. Remember, these aren't the old days where the mortgage banks could just come and take your house. The Dodd-Frank of 2008 and the CARES Act of 2020 have done miles to protect homeowners from predatory lending. So make sure you understand what's going on with your finances. And then there's also the potential for maybe doing a short sale before you do a foreclosure. We're going to get into some of those numbers here in a minute. Right now, there's about 1.24 million in forbearance right now. But let's look as we go back a little over a year. 4.76 all the way down to 1.4. This is a very quickly recovering area of the market. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the folks from Black Knight. If we go to Black Knight and they say 1.24 million mortgages are in forbearance, and we know about 7% of those have less than 10% equity. Got to move my face around again here. We're just going to come down here. Okay. Well, if every one of those with less than 10% equity, which is probably not going to happen, I'm not saying it will, but let's just play worst case scenario. If every one of those went into foreclosure, it's almost 87,000 foreclosures. Plus the 19,560 gets us to a total of 106,360. Now remember, we average about 290,000 a year. We're still nowhere close. Where's the crash? Where's the crash? Now, I talked a lot about this, and we remain vocal in our business. We need to continue to talk to people about this and make sure that they're not ill-affected. There's a lot of benefits to still owning a home these days. For example, the average homeowner, as we've talked in previous slides in these deep dives, the average homeowner earned over $50,000 last year just because they owned a house. And we're forecasting the same homeowners to generate another $111,000 over the next 5 years. So it's very, very important to keep all this in context that there is not a housing crisis right now. The crisis is we don't have enough homes. You've got millennials who waited to buy homes. You've got Gen Zers who are getting into the market early, and you've got baby boomers downsizing. You've got literally three generations, two of whom are the most populous ever, fighting basically over the same house. It's about a 1,700 to 2,000 square foot home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I jokingly call them the Chip and Joanna Gaines whitewash specials, right? Open concept, white kitchen, hot white bathroom, the whole 9 yards. It looks like a rock concert out in front of the house to this day. And that's the problem. We just don't have enough nice homes on the market. Okay? Number 5, getting on with things here. That's why we have a script. Otherwise, we could be here all day. And I know you got things to do. So number 5, demand for an item or service is impacted by an outside market dynamic. Well, let's think about Hummers and large SUVs in the early 2000s when oil prices skyrocketed. If you remember around that time, they actually stopped making Humvees. And a lot of those large SUVs, their production lines crashed because people simply stopped buying them because they couldn't afford to put gas in them. And we're kind of seeing that happen now. I was at the gas pumps today over here in Jacksonville, and premium gas is running a little over $4 a gallon. The mid-grade, which is kind of what I use, it was like $3.60, $3.65. But it cost me about $50 to fill up my car today. And a year ago, that same gas tank probably would have cost me about $35. It's not tragic, it's $15, but it's still $15. Okay? So, well, there's an outside dynamic that could have an impact on our business, and that's easy. It's mortgage rates. No doubt that this is the number one outside dynamic, and looking at, you could shoot up demanders. This is not going to be squelched unless rates get crazy, and we just don't think that they are. Okay. So here's a great graph showing historical rates. As we wrap up here, by the way, I know everybody's got a busy day, so I want to make sure I'm honoring your time as well. But as we wrap up here and we look back at 2016, 17, 18, and 19, and I can go all the way back to 2010, and I can tell you roughly that it fits about the same picture, with rates hovering around 3.5% to 5% over the last 10 years. So now what happened in the 2020 pandemic happens, and the Fed acts. Now the Fed cannot directly control interest rates, but they seek through monetary policy to influence the rates. So in 2020, when the pandemic hit, they attempted to influence rates, and the graph shows that they did a pretty good job of that because the rates went all the way down to about 3.25% or 2.75%. So what's happening right now is we're starting to see a rising interest rate environment. Now, again, you listen to some of the media guys and they're like, my God, the sky is falling, the rates have jumped. Well, again, the Fed seeks to influence rates. And the Fed started to taper bond purchases during their meeting a couple of weeks ago from $40 billion to $35. And everybody's like, oh, interest rates are going to go up for mortgages. Interest rates are going to go up. Well, they went back down again last week. So not all this is going to happen the way people think it's going to happen. And just because it's happened before, we cannot always use prior hypothesis basing to understand to inform our decisions of what's going to happen down the road, especially when the conditions are very different. Okay? So as we get into the next several years here, I see us coming back, and the experts agree here that we're going to come back and we're going to get back into that 3.5% to 4% rate range. And we don't have to be able to forecast the direct number, but we're basically seeing probably pretty close to what we've been seeing for the last 10 years as we get into next year and the years moving forward. And I think the mortgage companies are very aware that if they raise them too much, it's going to crash the business. And I think the markets at large are smart enough to figure out that just because we raise rates a little bit doesn't mean everything's going to come to a screeching halt. It may slow things down a little bit, but it's not going to hurt it that bad. Okay. Plus, we don't have the Fed we used to have. My parents, your parents, it was not uncommon for them to have 12 to 18% interest rates on a mortgage. We don't have that Fed anymore. That's not the Fed that we have now. This Fed operates very differently, and they're very, very sensitive to micro changes in the macroeconomic environment. And at least they've played that out so far. So again, as we forecast out, we're seeing a pretty stable interest rate market, but a rising interest rate market. Rising a little bit, not going up and going crazy. So I hope all this gives you some great perspective today. I really enjoy bringing you guys these videos. If you have any questions at all, I want you to put them in the comments. If you love the content, please like and subscribe to the channel. And again, I hate saying that, but we got to make the YouTube algorithm happy. This is a safe space. This isn't a place for you to come bring your conspiracy theories. You know, if you want to do that, I'm probably not going to respond to you. But if you have a genuine question, you want to learn more, and you want to understand things, put your comments in. Ask your questions. I will get back to you. I promise. This is a safe space. Let's learn from each other. Let's make it better, and let's stop catastrophizing everything. I've got to get on to my appointments. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week. You're prepared to make some more confident and better informed decisions. I'll see you next week. Have a good one. Bye-bye.